Hey guys, Mr. Bostic here. We're at that time now, since we've wrapped up our test on the present tense, that we need to deal with what in English we would call the past tense. Only in Spanish we have two past tenses, the imperfect and the preterite. And it's been my experience that you can't really understand one of those unless you understand how it compares or contrasts with the other one. So before we start actually learning endings or trying to use a new tense, we need to talk about how to break apart this thing we think of as one, but in Spanish is two. So let's try to dig into that. Like I said, there is no just past tense in Spanish. So there will never be an answer for me that you should use the past tense because, like I said, there are two of them. And so you have to figure out if an action you want to deal with has either happened simply, or it was happening, used to happen, would often happen, or just would happen frequently, right? And you're dealing here with the difference between the actions of various different kinds of sides of the coin. Actions are typically either they are, or you can describe them as one-time events, or they're repeated and habitual. They're either over and done with, or it's something that's continuing, stretching out over time in the past, maybe even into the present. They are main past events, or something that's just setting the stage as you wait for that main past event. They're either specific actions or just general description, the background. The simple answer is that the preterite, you're going to use it for things that are done with, they're completed. There's something that had a beginning, something that had an end. Whereas the imperfect is going to be used for incomplete actions or general background, past information. Another way of thinking about it is, if you're so inclined, is to think of it as a timeline. For preterite actions, as you see here, you really just have a dot on the timeline, a single, discrete, individual action that occurred. Right? The example sentence they give is "Yo andé por la calle," which means I walked down the street. Whereas if it's an imperfect action you want to describe, it's something that stretches out across a portion of the timeline, maybe a smaller portion, maybe a really long portion. And in Spanish, that same kind of sentence would become "Yo andaba por la calle." I was walking down the street. This is really the kind of difference that you have. Something that's a single action, discrete, over and done with, whereas the imperfect is kind of stretched out. It's sort of the background information. It's something that's occurring over time. So let's take a look at this idea. Right? If you have various actions happening together, it happens all the time, right? And one of those actions interrupts the other, right? You have this kind of goofy picture of a kid coming in saying "Hola, señor," pardon me. Whereas the teacher that he's talking to, or at least the gentleman he's talking to, is sitting down and looks like reading, right? The question you have is which of those is doing the interrupting and which of those is being interrupted? And the answer is it's the preterite that interrupts. It's the single action that comes in and interrupts the thing that's stretching out over time, much like you saw in the timeline. This fuzzy slide, pardon the quality of this image, is pretty good as a listing of the kind of different things to primarily consider. For the preterite, it's used for, as we said, single past events or specific moments in time. Right? Or it could be, say, a list of sequential actions, something like a police report. The perpetrator stole the car at 6 a.m., drove down to the corner store, broke in, that kind of thing. A list of single individual actions, right? And so you have preterite used for those. Or actions, as mentioned just a second ago, that interrupt an ongoing thing. Right? Whereas the imperfect, if you look at the green words, is dealing with actions that were in progress in the past. For example, he was running, right? Or something repeated, habitual, he used to do. The interrupted action. And by extension, telling what time it was, or what the weather was like, or what age a person was, because those things are true not just at a single instance, but they're true over a stretch of time by their nature, what time it was, what weather it was like for a while, what age a person was, right? Or descriptions of their physical or mental state. This is background information, things that would have been true at least for a little while, not a single instance. Now, in this clearer slide, you have up at the top here, you have mostly a repetition of that kind of stuff, with some differences. But the reason I include this here is that you have some interesting lists of phrases that can kind of indicate to you you're likely to need one of these tenses or the other. If you have ayer, that's yesterday, or anteayer, which is day before yesterday, or anoche, last night, or desde el primer momento, from the first moment, durante los siglos, during the ages, or during, kind of forever, el otro día, the other day. These are specific, generally specific moments in time. And if you start off a sentence or a phrase with a specific moment in time, what follows it is probably going to be a specific action. Right? It's not always, maybe, but likely. And then phrases that indicate the imperfect. A menudo, frequently. A veces, sometimes. Cada día, every day. Cada semana, every week. Cada año, every year. Nunca, which is a little tricky, right? But nunca would stretch over a long period of time, right? Because it means never, right? Mucho means much or frequently, right? These kind of things would indicate repeated sorts of notions, repeated sorts of actions, and therefore probably going to be followed by imperfect phrases. The way we'll talk about it in class is, well, the way I talk about it typically is flag words. And by that I mean a word that sort of waves a flag in your face and says, quit thinking about this, use a particular tense. And most especially the ones here circled in green for imperfect. If you see used to, all that means is the verb's in the imperfect, right? It's something that happened frequently. Or would, as in would often. This is something that would happen frequently. Now, watch out with would. There's another tense that would use would also, but not in the sense of would often and not in the past, right? So would in the sense of would often or would frequently, that kind of thing, would usually, that's going to tell you straight away, just use the imperfect tense for this. Anything where you're saying was or were plus ing forms of the verb. Now, once again, there is a tense that will do that kind of thing in Spanish, and it does it exactly like English, but you usually don't need it. And the reason you don't need it is that you have this, right? You have this one simple one-word tense to indicate that meaning. And in Spanish in general, when you have a one-word option, you use the one-word option. You don't have to use the kind of multiplied word options that English needs. Or, if example, you use the word mientras, which means while. It's hard to think of an example of use for the word while that's not going to be followed by something that's happening for a while. And therefore, you're going to need the imperfect tense for something, some verb following the word while. Oh, sorry. For the preterite, it's a little trickier, right? Any kind of phrase that indicates a discrete moment, suddenly, just then, at that moment, is going to probably indicate some action that was a unique, specific action. Probably something, in fact, that interrupted some background action. So hopefully you're getting the idea here. Now, if you ask, what about the endings for each tense, right? We have them listed right here. And unlike our kind of straight list of 6, they have the 3 on 3. Notice in the preterite, you only have 2 ending lists, regular ARs in the preterite, and regular ERs and IRs together in the preterite. And notice here, this O, it's got an accent. If you don't have that accent, it's going to look like many times like a present tense verb, but instead of for I, it's for he, she, and it, right? So be careful with that. Or amos, that actually can look just like the present tense. So it's a little tricky on these, right? Also, accents in the first and third singulars, right? Here on the imperfect, it's a little easier, right? Once again, just two ending lists. We don't have AR versus ER versus IR. We just have two, right? And something to pay special attention to. There are only three irregular verbs. Every other verb in the Spanish language is regular when it comes to the imperfect. So in many ways, that's one of the easiest tenses to learn. And it's the first one we will emphasize together, trying to get a new tense down. It should go pretty fast now that we have the verb list down. Notice one silly thing that here comes a message. Sorry about that. Right? One silly thing they did here. They give you the vosotros ending, right? But they don't give you a conjugated form of it. And this happens a lot with teaching systems that are largely Hispanic based. So this is one reason why I try to include it, right, for us in class, so we can know and be familiar with either. All right. Last thing. Here we have a little bit more detail, right? This whole exercise is dealing with telling your story, right? And so if you need to tell a story, guaranteed, if you don't want to sound like a foreigner, you're going to end up having to use both forms of the past tense, the imperfect and the preterite, depending on what the thing is in your story that's happening, right? So at another moment, at this point, we need to wrap up the video, and you're going to have some questions to answer. But at another moment, when you can take a look back, you can pause this and take a look at these different options, these different situations, things like, setting the background information. Where were you? Who were you with? And these are kind of things that happen over a stretch of time, right? And therefore they need the imperfect versus the preterite. What started the story? What happened in the story? What did people in the story do? Specific, discrete, individual actions, that kind of stuff. And hopefully this is making sense to you at this point. I hope so. If not, please feel free to message me with questions. When you get the opportunity, go back and take another look at the video. It's really a conceptual thing, and once you get this down, it's not hard to understand. It's just something like ser versus estar, or conocer versus saber, where we're having to separate out notions that in English we think of as the same, but in Spanish they're making distinctions. So try to learn those distinctions and go back here. Make sure you've taken notes on these endings. You're going to need to know them, and get these flag words down as well, right? Because these are the kind of things that are going to help you hold on to the conceptual knowledge and move forward using it. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you. I kind of miss seeing you guys around. Good luck in this class and all your classes, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.